Hey guys, tonight we dive into something that might seem a little gross or unglamorous at first, but trust me, it's deeply fascinating. We're exploring the surprising truth about historical personal hygiene across different eras. Yes, you heard that right. Forget those romantic images of knights in shining armor and elegant ladies in ball gowns for a moment. We're going to peek behind the curtain of daily life in the past, all the way into the bathhouses, bedchambers, and yes, even the toilets of history that rarely make the history textbooks. How did people try to stay clean without modern bathrooms and soap? What was it like to bathe in a medieval town or in an ancient Roman spa? Did kings and queens really smell as bad as some stories claim? And what on earth did everyone do before toilet paper existed? Brace yourself for some eye-opening and occasionally nose-wrinkling details. This won't be a glamorous tale, but it will be fascinating. Before we jump into the past, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan or some soft background sound. And if you enjoy these late-night history dives, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue these journeys. Feel free to let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global community gathered for these stories. Now, take a deep breath and relax. Let's ease into tonight's journey together, back to ancient Egypt, and uncover the untold details of how people really kept clean in ages past. Now imagine it's a clear, hot morning along the Nile thousands of years ago. We find ourselves in ancient Egypt around 1500 BCE, in a bustling town where the sandstone walls are turning golden under the early sun. A young man steps out of his mud brick home with a ceramic basin of water. You watch as he pours. Cool water from a jug over his head and shoulders, letting it cascade over his skin. This is his morning ritual. In fact, pretty much everyone here, rich or poor, starts their day with a refreshing wash. He scrubs himself lightly with a piece of hardened natron soap, a cleansing paste made from mineral-rich salts and oils. The water splashes onto the dusty ground as he rinses. Already you can feel the dry desert heat rising. So a morning bath like this is almost necessary just to feel human. After washing, he carefully shaves his head with a bronze razor. In ancient Egypt, a shaved head is the fashion for both practical and cultural reasons. By removing their hair, often even all their body hair, Egyptians hope to avoid lice and stay cooler under the blazing sun. Our friend runs a hand over his smooth scalp, then reaches for a wig made of scented black hair. Wigs are popular here, not just for style, but because they're easier to clean and keep free of pests than natural hair. He secures the wig on his head, instantly transforming his appearance with a neat, fashionable style. Next comes a dab of fragrance. He opens a small alabaster jar and scoops out a bit of creamy perfumed oil. As he rubs it onto his skin, especially under his arms and on his neck, a sweet aroma of myrrh and cinnamon wafts in the warm air. This isn't just to smell nice, it's an early form of deodorant. Nobody in this town has ever heard the word bacteria, but they know that scented oils and spices help keep bad odors away. In fact, Egyptians have developed little perfumed pellets, kind of like ancient deodorant balls, made from ingredients like citrus, cinnamon, and aromatic resins, which they can tuck under their armpits to stay fresh. They've even figured out that shaving the underarm hair helps reduce body odor, so he's done that too. He lifts his arms to check. Smooth and fragrant, not a whiff of yesterday's sweat. Now he pulls on a clean white linen tunic. Linen is the fabric of choice in this land. It's light and breathes well in the heat. Importantly, it can be washed easily. Egyptians prize cleanliness so much that even the poorest households will wash their linens regularly in the Nile or with water fetched from the river. Our friend's tunic dried overnight after a quick scrub the evening before, and now it feels cool and fresh against his skin. Before he heads out to work, there's one more touch: his teeth. Breakfast in ancient Egypt might be some coarse bread and onions, flavorful, but not great for the breath and often gritty from the millstone sand in the flour. So he picks up a small twig, one end frayed into soft fibers, and dips it in a mixture of crushed salt and dried mint. With this primitive toothbrush, he diligently rubs his teeth. The gritty paste of salt, iris petals, and peppermint might taste a bit odd, but it helps scrub away the overnight fuzz on his enamel. Ancient Egyptians actually came up with one of the world's first toothpastes. There's a surviving recipe mixing powdered iris flour, pepper, and salt, and they chewed breath mints made of frankincense resin or cinnamon to keep their mouths pleasant. After a good rinse and a chew on a pellet of frankincense, which leaves a pine-like fresh taste, our Egyptian man is ready to face the day, literally clean and bright from head to toe. As he walks through the narrow streets toward the river, you notice he's not an exception. Around you, other Egyptians are similarly well-groomed. Women have their eyes decorated with black coal eyeliner, which glistens in the sun. That black coal isn't just cosmetic. It also protects their eyes from the harsh glare and, believe it or not, helps prevent infections. The lead salts in coal have antimicrobial properties, though they didn't know the science of it. Children run by, many of them with their heads shaved except for one side lock of hair, a common style for youth. They likely had a quick splash of water too, to rinse off the night's dust. There's even a subtle pleasant fragrance in the air from all the incense burning in doorways and the hint of lotus oil on people's skin. This society truly values cleanliness. It's almost sacred. In fact, imagine this. Priests here bathe from head to toe in cold water several times a day before entering temples, because they believe cleanliness honors the gods. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, a guidebook for the afterlife, even warns that a person who isn't clean and properly scented may not be allowed to speak certain sacred spells in the afterlife. So being clean isn't just about comfort or social etiquette. It's linked to one's spiritual fate. Later in the day, under the shade of date palms, a wealthy noblewoman reclines at home. She too has bathed earlier this morning, and now she's having a servant girl braid her wig. The noblewoman's skin glistens slightly. She's covered her arms and legs in a luxurious lotion made from olive oil mixed with fragrant lotus blossom extract. It keeps her skin soft and protects her from sunburn and insect bites. Like many upper-class Egyptians, she adores perfumes. On a low table beside her are little glass and alabaster bottles containing scents like rose oil and jasmine. There's also a curious cone of waxy substance about the size of an apple. If she were attending a feast tonight, she would place that cone on top of her wig. Over the course of the evening, in the warmth, it would slowly melt, releasing a continuous trickle of perfume down her hair and body, an ancient aromatic air freshener that doubles as a hair conditioner. Can you imagine sitting at a banquet with a perfumed wax cone on your head, gradually melting and bathing you in fragrance? That's exactly what fashionable partygoers did here to ensure they smelled heavenly throughout the night. As the noblewoman prepares to entertain guests, she checks her fingernails, perfectly manicured and stained a reddish orange with henna dye. Manicures and pedicures are another part of the routine. Even pharaohs had personal manicurists. In this warm climate where everyone wears sandals or goes barefoot, cracked feet can be a problem, so they rub creams onto their soles too, often made with fats and herbs. Servants bring her a polished copper mirror, and she inspects her reflection, adjusting the kohl eyeliner that extends dramatically from the corners of her eyes in the typical Egyptian style. Satisfied that she looks and smells divine, she's confident she's honoring not just her guests, but also the gods with her cleanliness and elegance. Looking around, it might surprise you just how clean this ancient place is. It's not perfect by any means. The streets still have dust and the pungent presence of animals. Donkeys and cattle do leave their perfume around, but people here take measures to manage waste as well. Households have clay jars or pits as toilets, and many homes have a simple bathroom area where wastewater drains into ceramic pipes leading out to the street. Every morning, workers go around with brooms to sweep up debris and collect garbage from the streets, hauling it outside the town walls. Down by the riverbank, laundry is being washed. You see women standing knee-deep in the Nile, pounding clothes or rubbing them with a soapy paste made from animal fat and wood ash or natron to scrub out sweat and stains. In the midday sun, lines of white linen tunics and sheets flutter in the hot breeze, drying quickly. The scent of wet linen and the slightly alkaline soap, combined with the ubiquitous incense and flower perfumes, almost masks the less pleasant odors of daily life. Ancient Egypt's approach to personal hygiene is remarkably advanced. They don't know about microbes, but they know that life feels better, and perhaps even more virtuous when you're clean, scented, and refreshed. They believe disease can come from uncleanliness or evil spirits that loathe pleasant smells, so they do everything they can to ward that off. One Greek visitor, Herodotus, marveled that Egyptian priests would wash their bodies not once or twice but several times a day and shave all body hair every other day to maintain purity. You can almost feel the sense of pride Egyptians have in being well groomed each day. To them, cleanliness is a reflection of order and goodness. Life may not be easy. Most people labor in fields or workshops under a harsh sun, but at the start and end of each day, they make time to wash the dirt away and begin anew. Now, our journey moves eastward and even further back in time to a different land entirely. Picture an ancient city in the Indus Valley, around 2500 BCE, in what is now Pakistan, India. The sun beats down on baked mud brick houses, but here too we find people seeking relief and cleanliness through water. In the city of Mohenjo-Daro, imagine walking down a remarkably well-planned street and coming upon a curious structure, the Great Bath. It's a huge public bathing pool built of brick and sealed with natural tar, filled with clean water. Men and women likely descend a set of wide steps into the pool, perhaps for ritual purification, or maybe just to cool off and wash away the dust of the day. The water laps gently at the sides as a few people submerge themselves, then emerge refreshed, water gleaming on their bronze-toned skin in the sunlight. This might be one of the world's earliest known public bathhouses, and it shows just how important bathing was even at the dawn of civilization. As you wander the neatly laid out streets, you notice something else astounding. Nearly every house you pass has its own small bathroom area, a corner of the home with a sloped floor and a drain built into the wall. When a resident pours water over themselves to bathe, the wastewater trickles out through a clay pipe into covered drains that run beneath the streets. Yes, this city, over 4,000 years ago, has a crude but effective sewer system. These brick-lined drains run along the main roads, covered by slabs, which also act as sidewalks, carrying used water and waste outside the city walls to soak away pits. In some larger houses, you even spot what looks like a primitive toilet, essentially a brick platform or seat over a hole with a clay jar or sump below, and sometimes a channel to the drains. After use, someone would pour water to flush the waste down. It's not a flush toilet in the modern sense, but it's leagues ahead of many other places in the ancient world. You can imagine the pride the townsfolk might have felt in keeping their city so orderly and clean. No foul cesspools in the middle of the street here, unlike what you might find in less organized settlements of the same time. In fact, archaeologists have marveled that the drains of Indus Valley cities were regularly cleaned and maintained. If you listen closely down a side alley, you might hear the sound of a housewife scrubbing laundry at her home's washing spot, or a father pouring water over a child to rinse off the day's play. The people of the Indus Valley, like the Egyptians, value cleanliness as part of daily life. Bathing might also have spiritual significance. Some historians think the Great Bath was used for ritual immersions, perhaps an early form of practices that in Indian culture later evolved into daily bathing for purity. Looking at this city with its carefully laid bricks, straight streets, and thoughtful sanitation, it's clear that concern for hygiene and health is nothing new under the sun. Now let's turn westward to Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, ancient Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria, in what is modern-day Iraq and Syria. The air here is hot and dry, and the twin great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, are lifelines not only for crops but for washing and drinking. Imagine stepping into a courtyard in Babylon around 1800 BCE. In one corner, a fire crackles under a large clay pot. A Babylonian soap maker, perhaps a woman, since brewing soap was akin to cooking, is at work, stirring a thick concoction. The smell is sharp and acrid, a mix of wood ash lye and rendered animal fats bubbling away. It might not smell pleasant now, but this mixture will cool into something revolutionary, a crude soap cake. Indeed, the people of Mesopotamia have discovered that combining ashes, which yield caustic soda, with fats produces a substance that helps remove grease and grime. They might use it primarily to wash wool and textiles, but perhaps also occasionally on skin, with caution, as it can be harsh. Clay tablets from these ancient cities actually record recipes for soap-like substances. By 2200 to 2800 BCE, we see evidence of soap making in Babylon. If you were a traveler offered a chance to wash up in Babylon, you might be handed a little lump of this soft, clay-like soap to try along with a jug of water, an experience both cleansing and a bit harsh on the skin. The everyday Mesopotamian cleansed themselves in simpler ways too. A laborer after a sweaty day digging irrigation canals might rinse off in the Euphrates, scrubbing his skin with abrasive sand and water. In cities like Myrrh, archaeologists have found remains of bathrooms in palaces with proper drainage and even early seated latrines, indicating the elite enjoyed more comfortable hygiene amenities. But even common folk would rinse their hands and face regularly, knowing the value of basic cleanliness. Bathing in the river at evening could be a communal and refreshing activity. One cuneiform tablet of wisdom literature advises people to wash regularly and wear clean clothes as a sign of respect to the gods and oneself. And like in Egypt, pleasant smells were appreciated here too. The ancient Babylonians and Assyrians burned fragrant cedar and myrrh incense in their temples and homes, and they brewed perfumes from dates, flowers, and oils. There's an old Akkadian proverb that says something like, "Washing is honesty." It reflects the idea that being clean was linked with being civilized and virtuous. Mesopotamians even had a goddess of cleanliness and bathing, or at least a patron deity for health and purification through water. One can imagine a Babylonian mother scolding her child to wash up before eating, much as mothers do today. because even then they noticed that dirty hands could bring illness. They didn't know about bacteria, but they observed the effects. We see evidence that other ancient cultures also held cleanliness in high regard. In ancient Israel, for example, laws in the Hebrew Bible laid out rules for washing after certain activities. If you touched a dead body or had an illness, you were to wash yourself and your clothes and be ritually unclean until evening. They developed the mikveh, a kind of ritual bath, where people immerse themselves in water to restore purity. By the time of the Second Temple, around the time of Jesus, many Jewish settlements had built mikveh baths, showing an emphasis on regular ritual bathing. In ancient Persia, Iran, the religion of Zoroastrianism taught a deep respect for cleanliness as well. Purity of body and spirit were connected, so washing in flowing water was encouraged to wipe away spiritual pollution. All across the ancient world, from the Indus to the Nile to the Euphrates, people recognized that water could refresh and renew them. Being clean was often literally next to godliness, required by religion, or associated with moral goodness. From these ancient cradles of civilization, we now journey to the classical world of Greece and Rome, where new ideas of cleanliness and public bathing flourished. It's around 400 BCE in Athens. Under the warm Mediterranean afternoon sun, a young Greek athlete has finished his training at the gymnasium. Imagine him standing in a courtyard by a large marble basin. He's nude and glistening with sweat and olive oil. Greek athletes often trained coated in oil. Now comes the cleansing ritual. He picks up a small curved metal tool called a strigil and begins to scrape it along his arms and chest. With each stroke, a mixture of oil, dust, and sweat peels off his skin. It might sound strange to us, but this was the common way Greek athletes, and many non-athletes too, cleaned themselves. Soap is known but not widely used in this culture. Instead, oil and scraping do the job. As he scrapes, dirt and perspiration come away, leaving his skin surprisingly clean and moisturized by the thin layer of olive oil that remains. He wipes the strigil clean on a towel and continues until he's scraped head to toe. Finally, he pours a bucket of cool water over himself for a final rinse. Refreshed and clean, he might dab on a bit of perfume oil. The Greeks loved their perfumes just as the Egyptians and Mesopotamians did. Perhaps a touch of aromatic attar of roses before dressing. In the gentle breeze, you catch the scent of rosemary and thyme that grow around the palestra, herbs often tossed into wash water for a little fragrance. The Greeks do have baths too, small bathhouses in some cities or big ceramic tubs in wealthy homes, but nothing on the grand scale that will come later with the Romans. Athenian citizens might visit a simple public bathing establishment, which is basically a series of heated rooms where one can splash warm water on themselves and sweat a bit. Bathing for Greeks is often done in moderation. Daily full baths are not typical, but periodic bathing, and certainly daily washing of face, hands, and feet is common. They've heard of soap. The word sapo appears in later Roman texts, possibly derived from Celtic practices, but they largely prefer their tried-and-true olive oil scrub method. An exception might be the Spartans, those austere warriors of Greece. They reputedly disliked warm baths and fancy oils, believing such luxury would soften them. A Spartan was said to bathe in cold water, if at all, and avoid perfumes. One Greek proverb noted the Spartans didn't know the use of perfume, almost as a point of pride in their toughness. Let's shift a few centuries forward and travel to the heart of the Roman Empire. Say, 100 CE in Rome itself. We arrive in a bustling city of 1 million people, where aqueducts carry fresh water in abundance from distant hills. It's late afternoon, and much of Rome's population is headed to their favorite place to unwind, the public baths. Imagine entering the baths of Trajan, a magnificent bath complex recently built. Or for an even larger scale, picture the baths of Caracalla a few decades later, though those will be truly huge. The baths are enormous and opulent, a sprawling complex of stone and marble with mosaic floors depicting dolphins and tritons. Our Roman citizen, let's call him Marcus, pays a small entry fee, maybe a copperas, very affordable, as the baths are subsidized by the state or emperor. He stores his toga and sandals with an attendant in the apoditerium, changing room, perhaps tipping the fellow a coin to keep an eye on his clothes. Clad only in a simple loincloth or nothing at all, Marcus first visits the palestra, an open courtyard, to do a bit of light exercise, tossing a ball with friends, or wrestling playfully to work up a sweat. After getting his blood pumping, Marcus enters the bathhouse proper. The first room is the tepidarium, a warm chamber with beautifully painted walls and a pleasantly heated floor. The Romans have a clever underfloor heating system, the hypocaust, channeling hot air under the tiles. Here he lounges for a bit on a marble bench, acclimating to the warmth, chatting with a friend about the day's chariot race results and the latest political gossip. His skin starts to glisten with perspiration from the gentle heat. Next, he moves to the caldarium, the hot room, essentially a steam sauna. Immediately, a wave of steamy heat hits him. The room is filled with mist. Some patrons are ladling water onto a brazier to keep the steam coming. Marcus finds a spot and begins to sweat in earnest, opening up every pore. The sweat beads on his skin, and he might rub himself down with olive oil, provided by the bathhouse, often included in the entry fee or sold cheaply. Bath attendants are on hand if he'd like a massage or help with oil. After a good long soak in heat and steam, perhaps with a stop at a small hot plunge pool at one end of the caldarium, Marcus is ready to get really clean. Like our Greek friend, he uses a strigil. In fact, he might hire one of the bath slaves to give him a thorough scraping massage. Picture him standing or reclining while the attendant pours warm oil across his shoulders and back, then firmly scrapes the metal strigil along his skin. With each stroke comes a satisfying shwick sound, and a roll of oil, dirt, and sweat is peeled away. With each metallic whisper of the strigil against skin, layers of grime from the city and his own exertion are sloughed off. Marcus inspects the curved blade's edge. Yep, that grayish-brown gunk is what's come off his body. It's a bit gross, but also gratifying to see the evidence of cleansing. He might even chuckle and flick the gunk aside. Historically, some wealthy Roman women collected the sweat and oil scrapings of famous gladiators to use as aphrodisiac cosmetics. An odd fact. Fully scraped and perhaps after a brief muscle kneading by the masseur, Marcus thanks the attendant and moves on. Now thoroughly cleansed and relaxed, Marcus heads to the frigidarium, the cool room. Here, there is a large circular cold pool, almost like a modern swimming pool. He braces himself and then plunges in. Whew! The cold water is a jolt after all that heat. You can almost hear him gasp. But it closes up his pores and leaves him feeling invigorated and tingly. Around him, the pool echoes with laughter and conversation as bathers cool down together. The water's surface ripples in the lamplight, streaming in through high windows. A friend playfully splashes him, and they end up floating and chatting for a bit in the cool, refreshing water. Emerging from the frigidarium, Marcus dries off with a linen towel he brought. Or he can rent one. Spongy cotton towels aren't a thing yet, so woven linen does the job. He might sprinkle a bit of perfumed powder on his body, or dab on some scented oil, perhaps an essence of rose or iris imported from the east, as a finishing touch. Romans love their perfumes. The bathhouses themselves are often suffused with scents. So many people are oiling themselves with fragrant mixtures of myrtle, citrus, and herbs that the very walls of the baths seem to carry a permanent hint of aroma. In fact, one writer of the day describes walking by a baths and smelling the scent of men's oils on the street. Before getting dressed, Marcus still has one more stop in this daily ritual: the latrina, the public latrine. We follow him down a short corridor off the main hall into a room that might surprise, or shock, a modern visitor. It's a fairly spacious chamber lined on three sides with long, polished marble benches with keyhole-shaped holes cut in at regular intervals. Basically, elegant group toilet seats. No stalls, no dividers. A few other men are already seated, doing their business and casually chatting about the weather or the latest news from the provinces. Marcus lifts his light tunic and takes a seat among them, perfectly at ease. The Romans are far less shy about communal bodily functions than we are. Beneath the bench, fresh water is running in a trough to carry away waste into Rome's sewer, cloaca system. In front of the bench, at foot level, runs another shallow water channel. Floating in it or sitting in a container of clean water are sponge-topped sticks called tersoria. Here comes the part that might make you cringe. When finished, each patron takes the communal sponge stick, dips it in the clean water, sometimes with salt or vinegar added, and uses it to wipe themselves, then rinses it and leaves it for the next person. Marcus does this matter-of-factly while discussing grain prices with his neighbor. To us, the idea of sharing a sponge is horrifyingly unsanitary, but to the Romans, as long as it's rinsed, it's normal. Even some people in ancient times found this practice unappealing, but it was widely used. A few wealthy folks carried their own personal sponge-on-a-stick as a luxury. After washing his hands at a basin, Romans understood the wisdom of clean hands, at least after certain tasks. Marcus leaves the latrine and returns to the changing area. Dusk is approaching as he dresses in a fresh tunic and drapes his toga carefully over his shoulder. He feels splendid, clean, relaxed, and perfumed. He might pause by a mirror, polished metal disc, to check that his hair, which he left natural today, is combed nicely. If it's a day he feels like sprucing up further, he could visit the barber stall just outside the baths for a quick trim or shave. Roman men typically keep clean-shaven faces, a trend since the time of Julius Caesar, though beards come back in fashion occasionally, and the local tonsor, barber, is an important figure who not only shaves men, but also serves as a bit of a gossip columnist about town. The razor he uses is sharp and a bit scary looking, but a skilled barber can scrape a face smooth in minutes. Some Romans also remove stray body hairs. Wealthy women and even men might have a servant pluck out any errant hairs with tweezers, because a smooth, hairless body is seen as more refined. Body hair was sometimes equated with being uncivilized or too rustic. Ouch! Beauty has its price, even in antiquity. Women, meanwhile, have their own bathing sections or separate hours at the baths. Mixed bathing did happen in early imperial times and scandalized some. Later, it was officially segregated. Roman women after bathing would reapply their makeup, chalky white lead foundation, red ochre or vermilion on the lips and cheeks, and coal or soot for eyeliner. They too loved cosmetics and would remove them at night with creams or oil. An early cold cream was made from animal fat, olive oil, and beeswax. But at least, after the bath, they have a clean canvas to start with. As Marcus departs the bathhouse complex, the streets of Rome feel a bit less hectic than before. Many citizens have bathed and cooled off. so the city evening begins with a sense of refreshed calm. Still, not everything is pristine in Rome. The streets themselves, lacking a modern garbage collection, can be dirty. Vendors toss food scraps, horses leave manure piles, and narrow alleys, especially in the slums on the Capitoline and Aventine hills, carry the stench of overpacked living quarters. Homeowners or their slaves do sweep their front stoops, but a lot of filth ends up just accumulating until heavy rain or official street cleaners, going by with carts and brooms, clear it away. One has to be careful walking, especially after dark, to avoid stepping in something unpleasant. And beware of upper-story windows. It's not unheard of for someone to empty a chamber pot out the window with a yell of "Gardes l'eau!" Watch out for water, in the French that will later be common in Europe, or its Latin equivalent. In fact, the Roman satirist Juvenal complained about people tossing trash and even their dirty wash water from windows, posing a hazard to night pedestrians. So while Rome had magnificent public amenities like sewers and baths, everyday sanitation still left much to be desired in the dark back streets. Interestingly, Romans also innovated with laundry. They had fullers' workshops where professional launderers cleaned clothes, particularly the white wool togas that were notoriously hard to keep bright. And how did they clean them? In large vats filled with water and urine. Yes, human and animal urine, which contains ammonia, turned out to be an excellent cleaning agent and bleach. The city placed jars on street corners for people to relieve themselves in, and the collected urine was sold to these laundries. Fullers would mix urine and clay and stomp on garments in the mixture, then rinse them. Emperor Vespasian even put a tax on urine collection, much to his son's embarrassment. Vespasian famously quipped, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't stink, while holding a coin under his son's nose to prove the point that profit from pee was still profit. After seeing how every aspect of Roman life intersected with cleanliness, from communal sponges to taxed urine, you might appreciate why later generations looked back on Rome with a mix of admiration and a bit of disgust. Despite some of these unsavory details, it's fair to say a city-dwelling Roman like Marcus, especially with access to daily baths, was probably among the cleanest people in the world up to that point. In fact, after the Roman Empire's decline, Europe wouldn't see such levels of public hygiene infrastructure for many, many centuries. The Roman emphasis on bathing daily or almost daily, for those who could, at least in towns and in the military, was a mark of their civilization. They even built bathhouses in far-flung provinces, so that a Roman outpost in, say, Britain or Syria still had thermae to keep the Roman lifestyle going. In the ruins of Roman forts along the damp frontiers of northern Europe, archaeologists still find remains of bath buildings with hypocausts. The legionaries insisted on their steam and hot water even in the chilly drizzle of Britannia. Not everyone in the empire partook equally, of course. The very poor or slaves might only get a quick splash from a fountain on a holy day, or a dip in the river when they could. In rural areas far from any town baths, people likely settled for washing in streams or using a basin at home, perhaps not daily, but whenever practical. And there were a few notable curmudgeons who thought frequent bathing was decadent. Some Stoic philosophers preached simplicity. One, Musonius Rufus, suggested that one should bathe in cold water and not too often, to toughen the body and avoid soft living. But by and large, balneare, to bathe, was as routine a verb in Latin as to eat, or to sleep. The Romans also paid attention to other aspects of personal grooming. Trimming nails. Special nail cleaners and files made of metal have been found in toiletry kits. Cleaning ears. Little ear picks were common utensils. And freshening breath. For that last one, a number of herbs were chewed. A polite Roman might chew parsley or mint after a meal, or suck on anise seeds for a sweet breath. Some folks used tooth powders made of ground charcoal, powdered bone, or salt to scrub their teeth, rubbing with a finger or cloth. And here's one surprising and somewhat off-putting technique a few Romans apparently used: whitening their teeth and freshening their mouth with aged urine. Yes, it comes back to urine again. It contains ammonia, which can lift stains. We have writings of the poet Catullus teasing a man for having dazzling teeth because, he jokes, the man gargles with Iberian urine. Apparently, urine from Spain was considered extra strength. It sounds horrifying, but it likely did kill bacteria and bleach the teeth a bit. Thank goodness chewing on a mint leaf accomplished nearly the same social goal. The public latrines we saw Marcus use were also an innovation that perhaps surprisingly would vanish in the centuries after Rome. Those multi-seat bathrooms, as odd as they are to us, were a way to centrally manage waste. In much of medieval Europe that follows, such efficient systems would not exist. People would revert to chamber pots and dumping waste in the streets, making cities far dirtier than Rome under the Caesars. So, standing in the twilight of imperial Rome, we have witnessed a high point of ancient cleanliness, a world of splendid bathhouses, scented oils, communal toilets, and even early soap and toothpaste. But change is on the horizon. As we know, Rome's Western Empire will eventually fall, and with it, many public health and hygiene infrastructures will crumble or be abandoned. The concept of daily bathing, even of building large public baths, will diminish in the West for a long time. We're about to step into a very different age, one often stereotyped as filthy and dark. But was it truly so? Let's continue our journey and find out what happens to personal hygiene when the shimmering marble baths of Rome are no more. We leave behind the grandeur of Roman aqueducts and baths and step into the early medieval world. In the centuries after Rome's fall, say around 600 CE, daily life in Western Europe changed dramatically. Cities shrank, aqueducts broke, and those magnificent bathhouses either fell into ruin or were repurposed as meeting halls, stables, even churches. But people didn't stop caring about cleanliness altogether. They simply adapted to more basic means and sometimes adjusted their attitudes. Imagine a villager in the Frankish kingdom, early medieval France, heating a blackened iron cauldron of water over the hearth. She's warming water for a bath, but not a daily one. This is a special occasion, maybe the weekly wash on Sunday. Once the water is hot, which took considerable effort gathering firewood and time to boil, she pours it into a large wooden tub in the middle of her cottage's main room. She might toss in a few fragrant herbs, a handful of thyme or rosemary, into the water, a traditional touch to make it smell nicer and perhaps to ward off bad airs. People believed fragrant herbs could drive away illness. Her husband, fresh from working the fields, takes his turn first. He strips off his rough tunic and gingerly steps into the wooden tub, easing himself into the warm water with a sigh of relief. It's not deep, maybe enough to reach his waist when seated, but he splashes the warm water over his grimy skin, rubbing away at his arms and chest. There is a bar of soap at hand, a humble lump of homemade lye soap that she cooked up months ago from goat tallow and wood ashes. It's brownish and harsh, but it lathers a little and smells of old fat and lye with a hint of dried lavender she mixed in. He scrubs his arms and chest with the soap, working away the caked dirt. After soaping and scrubbing, he uses a small bucket to scoop up some clean warm water, set aside earlier, and pour it over himself to rinse off, since by now the tub water is a murky gray-brown from the dirt and sweat. He steps out, his skin a bit raw from scrubbing, but noticeably cleaner, and wraps in a linen cloth. Next up might be the older children. They'll reuse that same bathwater. The eldest son climbs in and quickly dunks, scrubs, and exits, followed by his younger siblings one after another. By the time the baby of the family is bathed, the water is tepid and quite dirty indeed. There's an old saying, from much later, but often applied to these times. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, hinting at exactly this scenario. The water could get so opaque by the final turn, usually the baby's, that one might not notice the little one in there. While that phrase is more tongue-in-cheek, it underscores how precious and infrequent full family baths could be. Heating that much water and filling a tub is an event, not an everyday thing. On ordinary days, however, this family doesn't have the luxury or stamina for a full tub bath. Instead, each morning they perform a simpler toilette, a quick wash of face, hands, and maybe armpits with cold water from a basin. Even in medieval times, people understood that at least washing the visible parts and the hands before meals was important for basic decency and health. It's customary to offer guests water to wash their hands and face upon arrival. Hospitality 101. Throughout medieval Europe, before any meal, a lord would have a basin brought out so all could wash their hands. Eating was done often with fingers, so this was both practical and polite. One common routine in a modest home is to have someone pour water from a pitcher over another's hands into a bowl. We see it in manuscripts, servants going around with ewers and basins so diners can wash before and after eating. So picture a medieval tavern around 1200 CE. A weary traveler comes in from a long, muddy road. The tavern keeper's daughter brings a basin and a jug of warm water, pouring it over the traveler's dirty hands while he scrubs them, perhaps even letting him splash his face. A towel is offered for drying. It's a small gesture of hospitality and hygiene that spans social classes. Even kings did this ritual of hand-washing, and so did peasants at their rough-hewn tables. Speaking of social classes, how did the nobility keep clean in these times? Let's imagine the routine of a high-born lady in, say, 13th century England. Lady Eleanor wakes in her canopied bed in a chilly stone castle. The morning sun sneaks in through narrow windows covered in oiled linen. Glass is a luxury. First order of business, her maid brings a wide bowl of warm rose-scented water and a fine linen cloth. Lady Eleanor dips the cloth in the fragrant water and gently wipes her face, neck, and hands. A medieval morning cleanse. She might even have something akin to a toner, perhaps a little vial of herbal vinegar that she dabs on her face as an astringent. Recipes existed for toilet vinegars with rosemary, mint, or roses steeped in vinegar, used to freshen and tighten the skin. Next, she unbraids her long hair, which was covered in a nightcap while she slept. The maid stands by with a comb and begins the task of untangling and cleaning Lady Eleanor's hair. With no shampoo as we know it, hair isn't washed daily or even weekly. It might be washed only a few times a year with a special lye-based solution or just warm water and herbs. Instead, they maintained hair by vigorous brushing and combing to remove dirt and distribute oils, and by applying scented oils or powders occasionally. As the maid runs the comb through her mistress's chestnut hair, she's also on the lookout for lice. Head lice are extremely common, even among the rich. Lady Eleanor's comb is a finely carved bone comb with very close-set teeth, essentially a night comb, and sure enough, a tiny louse or two gets snagged. The maid plucks them out and unceremoniously crushes them, or flicks them into the hearth's embers. It's so routine that neither lady nor maid make much of it, part of the daily pest control. To further ward off these critters, Lady Eleanor has her maid burn a bit of incense or herbs in the chamber. The smoke of certain herbs, like rosemary or pennyroyal, was believed to repel lice and fleas. She also sometimes wears a small sachet of lavender or hops inside her coif, head covering, because it's noticed that strong herbal scents seem to help a bit with the bugs, and at least mask any scalp odor. Now it's time for Lady Eleanor's occasional bath. But note, this isn't a daily event. Perhaps she takes a full bath only once a month or on special occasions, unless she's particularly fastidious. When she does bathe, it's an involved affair. Servants must lug bucket after bucket of water from the kitchen hearth or well, heating some of it over fires, and then pour it into a wooden tub lined with a linen sheet in her chambers. It might be a large barrel-like tub or a more elegant collapsible tub that can be brought to her room. The water is perfumed with flower petals or herbs. She loves when they sprinkle in rose petals and marjoram. Finally, when the tub is ready, likely in the afternoon when the day is warmest, she disrobes behind a curtain and steps into the bath. Ah, the warm water feels lovely in the drafty castle. Perhaps she'll soak a while as her maids gently scrub her skin with a soft cloth and a little scented soap. Yes, she has soap. Nicer soap than the peasants. Imported Castile soap from Spain. A prized white soap made from olive oil. It's far gentler and sweeter smelling than the coarse tallow soaps. She washes her long hair too, maybe with a mixture of water and aromatic herbs like chamomile or a touch of lye soap and then a rosemary rinse. After the bath, she steps out, and the maids wrap her in warmed linen towels. The used bath water is gray-brown, evidence that even in her pampered life, real bathing is infrequent enough that the water gets quite dirty. The servants will have to bail that water out and dispose of it, likely tossing it outside or into a cesspit. Bathwater is heavy and a pain to deal with, another reason people didn't bathe daily. Bathing is truly a luxury in terms of labor and resources. Between such baths, Lady Eleanor relies on what she calls a dry wash each day. She changes her linen undergarments regularly, possibly even every day. This is crucial, they've learned, to feeling clean. Medieval advice often said that wearing clean linen next to the skin keeps a person relatively clean, even if the body isn't fully bathed often. The linen chemise or shirt absorbs sweat and oils, and by changing it and washing that garment, you in effect refresh the body. It's like a sacrifice. The linen takes on the dirt, so your skin doesn't have to hold it. Lady Eleanor's maids therefore ensure she has fresh-smelling chemises ready. They boil her soiled linens with lye and herb soap in the castle washhouse regularly. She also uses perfumes liberally. She might dab some rose water on her wrists and throat in the morning. She keeps little pomanders, ornate balls packed with fragrant resin, musk, ambergris, and spices, which she can hold to her nose if there's an offending odor about, and in a medieval castle, there often is. Her chambers are often strewn with fresh herbs and flowers. Rushes on the floor might be mixed with lavender and mint to release pleasant aromas when stepped on. All these measures mean that when Lady Eleanor steps out in her fine gown, she presents an image and scent of freshness and luxury, even if she hasn't immersed in a tub for weeks. Meanwhile, down in the castle's great hall, her husband, Lord Robert, is already up and about. He's not one for frequent baths. He jokes with his knights that he bathes once a year, whether he needs it or not, and they chuckle. It's a bit of hyperbole. He likely bathes a few times a year. But he does wash his face and hands each morning, splashing cold well water on his ruddy face and scrubbing with a rough cloth. He finds it invigorating, like a cold splash to wake up. He'll also rinse his mouth with some wine or ale. Actual toothbrushing is uncommon, though he might rub his teeth with a clean cloth or chew on a twig of sage or mint for a fresher breath. He keeps his beard trimmed and combed. A well-groomed beard is a knightly pride. In fact, he has a beautifully carved comb, perhaps brought from Paris, that he runs through both hair and beard daily. Personal combs are as ubiquitous in medieval times as smartphones are today. People carry them to keep their hair free of tangles and lice. An English monk famously grumbled that Viking invaders were too attractive to local women because they comb their hair every day, bathe every Saturday, and change their clothes regularly. By Lord Robert's time, even though Vikings are long gone, their grooming habits have been adopted widely. Weekly bathing for those who can, daily combing, and wearing fresh shirts often. After breaking his fast, Lord Robert heads to the garderobe to relieve himself. The castle's garderobe is essentially a small closet built into the thickness of the outer wall, with a wooden seat that has a hole dropping down to a pit, or straight outside the wall into the moat. It's chilly. Drafts come right in the hole. But effective, waste plummets down and away from the living quarters. Interestingly, people sometimes hang their clothes or linens in the garderobe. Why? The strong ammoniac stench from below was thought to repel fleas and moths from the fabrics. A medieval life hack. Use the toilet area as a sort of fumigation closet for your garments. After finishing, he pulls a small lever to drop a bit of water or just tosses a handful of rushes or straw down to somewhat cover the smell. Garderobes need periodic cleaning, a gross job often given to the lowest of the servants or hired latrine cleaners, nicknamed gong farmers in later Tudor times, who would shovel out the pits when they became too full. For now, the pit might be emptied annually or so, and the contents carted off to be used as fertilizer in fields. Nothing wasted in the medieval economy. Not everyone lives in a castle, of course. In a medieval town, many households use simple outhouses in backyards or share communal latrine pits. And just as often, people use chamber pots, basically portable buckets, especially at night. What do they do with these brimming chamber pots each morning? Often, toss them out the nearest door or window. If you were walking down a narrow street in, say, 14th century London or Paris, you'd have to watch your step and occasionally look up to watch your head. It was common courtesy, and sometimes law, that before dumping a chamber pot from an upper window, one should shout a warning. In Paris, the cry was "Gare l'eau," French for watch out for the water, ironically using a polite term for something not so clean. In English, this became "Gardez-lou," a warning that might send any alert pedestrian scurrying for cover, lest they be doused with last night's slops. City ordinances in the Middle Ages tried to curb this behavior by specifying times one could dump or requiring it be done in a certain place, but enforcement was lax. Thus, medieval cities often smelled quite foul. One 14th century visitor to Paris wrote that the streets reeked of mud, refuse, and dung, without sewer systems like Rome had. Filth just piled up. Rain helped wash some of it to the rivers, which unfortunately were also sources of drinking water. And remember, tanneries, butcher shops, and other trades also contributed awful wastes to the streets and rivers. Blood, offal, chemicals like tannin. The river Seine in Paris and the Thames in London were terribly polluted. People still drank from them, or from shallow wells contaminated by privies. It's no wonder diseases ran rampant. Yet, in the midst of what we might consider squalor, medieval people still strove for personal cleanliness where they could. many did care about their appearance and odor. Public bathhouses actually made a resurgence in the High Middle Ages, 12th to 14th centuries. Believe it or not, towns like Paris, London, and others had numerous stews, bathhouses called stews in England, possibly because they were like stewing in hot water. Let's step into one of these communal bathhouses, say in 14th century Paris on a winter evening. You find a tall, timber-framed building marked by a sign depicting a bathtub. Inside, it's warm and steamy, a welcome refuge from the chilly, muddy streets. A bathhouse keeper, often a woman or a married couple, greets customers and takes payment for a bath and whatever services one might desire. Along the walls are wooden tub after tub, most already filled with hot water. Attendants scurry about with huge buckets of water, topping up tubs or moving screens for a bit of privacy for patrons. In one corner, a group of traveling merchants have rented the largest tub and sit together in the buff, scrubbing each other's backs and sharing a jug of wine. Yes, some bathhouses will serve you a meal or drink while you soak. 2 tubs over, a mother is gently washing her squirmy toddler, who giggles and splashes, much to the amusement of nearby bathers. The atmosphere is surprisingly convivial, and by our standards, casual about nudity. In many of these bathhouses, men and women bathe together, often wearing a loose linen bathing garment around the waist or torso for modesty, but sometimes not. By the 14th century, authorities in some cities are starting to complain that bathhouses have become too libertine, with mixed bathing and whatnot. It's true. Bathhouses often doubled as places of entertainment and even encounters. Some have separate rooms where one can get a massage or, if inclined, companionship of an ill repute sort. Many a medieval moralist wrote that the bathhouse was a den of sin after dark, but in the daytime, it's largely a family-friendly wellness center. The water in the tubs is usually scented with herbs like chamomile, thyme, or sage to make it pleasant. Soap is available, often better quality soap than a peasant could make at home. One bather lathers his hair with a bar of greenish Castile soap, imported olive oil soap, and rinses it, remarking how nice it is not to smell like sweat and the stable for once. Another is getting a shave from a barber who works on site. Some bathhouses had resident barbers, since bathing softened the beard nicely for shaving. One-stop shop for grooming. In the corner, a musician hired by the establishment strums a lute, providing gentle background music. Truly, for a common person living in a cramped house, the public bathhouse is a little oasis of warmth, cleanliness, and even fun. These bathhouses often offered different sections or times for women and men, but mixed sessions were common too, to the dismay of the devout. They were big business. In Paris, the Guild of Bathhouse Keepers was official and numerous. There were rules posted. One surviving list from Paris required that bathhouses not open before daylight for safety of patrons coming in the dark, and forbade scandalous behavior like prostitution on the premises, though enforcement of that was iffy. Prices were usually reasonable, a few pennies for a simple bath, more if you wanted extras like a private room or special herbs. People of all social classes visited. A wealthy noble might rent the whole place for a private party, while an apprentice might save up for a weekly visit to get clean and relax. Let's listen in to 2 friends at a London stew around 1350. One man sinks deeper into the wooden tub's hot water and groans happily. Nothing better after a week of work in the tannery than a good soak, eh? His companion, eyes closed in bliss, replies, "Aye, washes the stink right off, and my back's been killing me. This heat works wonders." The first man takes a cake of soap and starts scrubbing under his arms vigorously, He jokes, "If my wife could see me now, might think I'd turned courtier, smelling of soap." They both laugh. People in this time often crack jokes about those who overdo it with washing. It's a bit of a stereotype that only fops and the overly vain bathe too often. But quietly, everyone appreciates feeling clean when they can. The companion says, "Well, not everyone shares our good habit. I heard old Master Higgs hasn't had a proper bath since last Christmas. Can you imagine? Folks keep their distance in the market, I tell you." They chuckle. Even in a less hygiene-obsessed age, they clearly notice when someone is particularly filthy or smelly. Social pressure to not reek was certainly present. However, the heyday of these communal tubs wouldn't last forever. Trouble was brewing, or rather bubbling, in the form of disease. In 1348, the bubonic plague, Black Death, swept through Europe, killing a third of the population or more. In its wake, fear and superstition grew. One idea that took hold was that bathing, especially in warm water, might make you more vulnerable to plague by opening the pores of the body and letting in the malevolent bad air, miasma, believed to carry the disease. Some plague tracts advised against bathing during epidemics for this reason. Additionally, around the late 1400s, a new dread arrived: syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that first exploded in Europe in the 1490s. People didn't understand it well, but they saw patterns. It seemed to afflict those who frequented the more lascivious bathhouses and brothels. Suddenly, public baths got a reputation not only as morally dubious, but as dangerous to your health. Authorities in many cities, alarmed by syphilis, which they called the French disease or Great Pox, ordered bathhouses closed to prevent its spread. And so, by the dawn of the 16th century, the public bath culture of medieval towns had sharply declined in Western Europe. Many bathhouses were shuttered or converted to other uses. The idea of daily or weekly communal bathing faded. Cleanliness practices shifted more toward home, washing with a basin and cloth, and relying on fresh linens and perfumes. Ironically, in some respects, hygiene regressed among the general populace compared to the High Middle Ages. We have entered the Renaissance and early modern period, 1500s to 1700s, a time of beautiful art and literature, yes. But personal hygiene in Europe is about to take some strange turns, filled with powder, perfume, and a fair share of funk. Before we leave the medieval era entirely, it's worth noting, medieval folks were not uniformly filthy or oblivious to hygiene, as sometimes portrayed. They had soaps, they enjoyed baths when available, they valued clean clothes and pleasant smells, and they even had some rudimentary dental care, chewing herbs, rubbing teeth with cloth and salt, using toothpicks, which were often goose quills or wooden slivers. They did what they could within the limits of their infrastructure and beliefs, and in other parts of the world during these same centuries, standards could be even higher. For instance, while a European peasant might skip baths all winter, in the Middle East, the hammam public bathhouse culture, inherited from Rome and boosted by Islamic tradition, thrived. A traveler from Europe to, say, Damascus or Cordoba in the 12th century would have found numerous operational bathhouses and people bathing regularly as part of religious cleansing. Islamic teachings require washing certain parts of the body before the 5 daily prayers and a full body wash on certain occasions. Cleanliness was considered half of faith. One 11th century Andalusian traveler in Baghdad noted with some astonishment how often his hosts bathed and how clean their garments were compared to back home. The Crusaders, who went to the Holy Land in the 12th century, often took advantage of the superior bathing facilities they found there. There are accounts of grimy nights, gratefully scrubbing down in Palestinian bathhouses, and perhaps inadvertently bringing some soap back to Europe, along with tales of exotic spices. In Viking Scandinavia, a few centuries earlier, 9th to 10th century, we already saw hints of advanced hygiene. Vikings had a reputation for good grooming. Weekly bathing, Saturday was literally bath day in Norse, daily hair combing, and frequent changes of clothes made them notably cleaner than their Anglo-Saxon contemporaries. An English cleric, John of Wallingford, begrudgingly wrote that Viking men used these habits to seduce good English women. The women appreciated their clean hair and pleasant appearance. Even in the middle of warlike life, those Norse managed some cleanliness we might applaud. In the Far East, medieval China and Japan had their own hygiene practices. The Song Dynasty Chinese, 10th to 13th century, invented an early form of the toothbrush, a bamboo handle attached to boar bristles. Essentially, the direct ancestor of our toothbrush today. They used it with salt and herbal powders to polish their teeth. They also bathed, though not as frequently as later on. Bathhouses existed in cities. For example, in the Tang era, public bathhouses in the capital Chang'an were used much like Roman baths. The Japanese by the feudal period, say 15th to 16th century, were deeply fond of hot baths. Communal bathhouses, sento, were common in cities by the 1600s, and by then, many ordinary people in Japan were bathing daily or near daily, especially in the form of a soak in hot water each evening, a practice that continues culturally to this day. In fact, a visiting European in the 16th century might have been shocked to see how frequently and casually the Japanese bathed, and perhaps shocked at the mixed-gender nude bathing that was then common and totally without sexual connotation to the Japanese. Those Europeans likely carried the news back home that in some far-off lands, people enjoy being clean every day. Imagine that. So, by the end of the Middle Ages, humanity's approaches to hygiene were diverse. Some were luxuriating in herb-scented tubs, others making do with a once-weekly wipe-down. Cleanliness varied by culture, by class, by climate. It's much easier to bathe in a warm climate than in a frigid one without indoor heating, and by personal preference. The stereotype of the stinky Dark Ages has some truth regarding public sanitation and infrequent bathing among certain classes, but it also overlooks the efforts people did make. They didn't want to be dirty. They just lacked some of the means, knowledge, or maybe the priority that we have today. Now, as we turn the page to the Renaissance and early modern period, 1500s to 1700s, you might expect things to improve with all the advancements in arts and sciences. Surprisingly, that's not immediately the case in terms of hygiene in Europe. In fact, in some ways the 16th to 18th centuries in Europe saw a decline or a curious transformation in personal hygiene habits. This is the era of powdered wigs, heavy perfumes, and elaborate clothing, often worn over an unwashed body. We're entering a time where the elite will sometimes proudly avoid water and instead fight odor with chemistry and cosmetics. It's a dramatic shift that might leave you both amused and grateful not to have experienced it firsthand. The Renaissance and Baroque periods, 15th to 17th centuries, usher in an era of exquisite art, music, and refined court life. But if you stepped into that beautiful painting of a royal court, your nose might wrinkle in protest. Paradoxically, as European society became more splendid in fashion and culture, its approach to personal hygiene often grew more lax and creative. Cleanliness became something of an illusion maintained by layers of powder, layers of clothing, and clouds of perfume. Imagine walking through the opulent Palace of Versailles in France around 1680 during the reign of King Louis XIV, the Sun King. The palace is dazzling. Gilded furniture, mirrored halls. Ladies in enormous silk gowns glide by. Gentlemen sport lace cuffs and towering powdered wigs. A gentle bow, a dainty kiss on the hand. It all seems very elegant. But beneath the satin and powder, there's a secret. Many of these courtiers have not had a proper bath in weeks, even months. Water is viewed with suspicion by the fashionable set. Doctors of the day sometimes warn that bathing, especially immersing the whole body in warm water, can disturb the humors or open the body to disease. The pores, they think, are gateways. Keep them closed with a fine layer of natural oils and dirt, and you'll block illness. There's also a moral hesitancy. Being naked in a tub is seen as immodest except under specific circumstances. So the wealthy often conclude, why bathe when you can achieve cleanliness by other means? So instead of reaching for soap and water, they reach for their powder puffs and perfume vials. The air at Versailles is heavy with fragrance. Clouds of floral and musky scents emanate from every person. Courtiers douse themselves in colognes and scented oils. Louis XIV himself is said to adore strong scents and demands a well-perfumed court. One popular concoction is Hungary water, essentially rosemary and alcohol, which people splash liberally on skin and clothes. Another is jasmine oil. The king reportedly had fountains of orange blossom-scented water installed at his residence so that even the air would be perfumed. People also carry little personal perfume dispensers, jewel-encrusted pomanders filled with ambergris, civet, musk, and spices, which they can raise to their nose if an unpleasant odor does manage to break through the aromatic haze. Let's focus on one such lady at court, Madame de Montpignon. She rises in the morning under a canopy of brocade curtains. Overnight, her face remained coated in a thick layer of white makeup, a lead-based cosmetic fashionable for giving that pure, pale complexion. She did not wash it off for bed. Doing so every day would be too harsh on the skin, not to mention time-consuming, and she likes to keep a bit of the base on to save time tomorrow. This morning, her maid uses a soft brush to gently remove any flaking bits of yesterday's powder, and then touches up Madame's face with fresh layers of white powder and dabs carmine red on her lips and cheeks. A beauty patch, a little velvet star, is applied to her cheekbone, both a fashion statement and handy for covering a small pox scar or blemish. Bathing? Non. Madame does not bathe. She believes water on the skin, especially the face, could give her colds or worse, spoil her carefully tended complexion. Instead, she will dry clean her body. Her maid has prepared a basin not of water, but of spirits, a mixture of alcohol, herbs, and maybe a few drops of her favorite perfume. Using a sponge or cloth, the maid dabs and wipes Madame de Montpignon's neck, underarms, and wherever else sweat might gather. The alcohol in the mix cleans and deodorizes somewhat, and it evaporates quickly, leaving a pleasant herbal scent. This was known as toilet vinegar in the era, a common cosmetic for cleaning the skin without water. She might also powder those areas with fine talcum or starch powder afterward to stay dry and fresh-smelling. For intimate areas, linen cloths and perhaps a sprinkle of floral powder suffice. Madame's long hair, actually mostly a wig now, is dressed not by washing, but by pomading and powdering. First, any natural hair she still shows, like the front locks, is coated with pomade, a greasy paste of animal fat and scents, to make it sticky, and then liberally dusted with perfumed starch powder to achieve that fashionable dusty white look. Her wig, which was sent to the wig maker last week to be cleaned of excessive buildup, is now pristine, and has been recurled, lightly scented with lavender. The maid carefully pins it onto Madame's head and secures it. If you were close, you might catch a faint whiff of stale butter from the pomade beneath the pleasant rose powder. But only if you got very close, which no one dares without invitation. Now dressed in layers of chemise, corset, panniers, and the final sumptuous gown, Madame de Montpignon is nearly ready to face the court. But first, a few finishing touches at her toilette, the dressing table ritual that is practically a social ceremony in this era. She applies a few drops of perfume behind her ears and on her handkerchief. Her perfume is a complex blend of jasmine, orange blossom, and ambergris, exotic and expensive. She might also lightly scent her gloves. Gloves were often perfumed with civet or musk, so that every gesture of the hand releases a bit of fragrance. This practice started back when tanned leather smelled awful, and perfume was used to mask it. But by the 17th century, perfumed gloves are just de rigueur for elegance. Lastly, she takes a delicate pinch of scented snuff, tobacco powder, which oddly enough will help her smell things less sharply, since frequent snuff use can dull the sense of smell. Many courtiers use snuff not just for the nicotine buzz, but as another aromatic curtain. Snuff is often mentholated or mixed with flower essences, giving a little refreshing jolt with each tiny inhale. Stepping into the gleaming hall of mirrors for the daily court gatherings, Madame de Montpignon presents a vision of beauty and refinement. And indeed, to any observer, she likely smells delightful, a moving bouquet of jasmine, rose, and powder, with not a hint of human musk. The efforts to achieve this, as we saw, were considerable. But wait, what's that faint odor underlying the perfume in these halls? Ah, yes, the palace itself has a smell that no amount of potpourri can fully erase. You see, Versailles, for all its grandeur, has very few proper toilets. Those that exist are often reserved for the highest nobles. Thousands of people virtually live there daily, and nature's calls must be answered. The common solution? Find a discreet corner, a stairwell, antechamber, or behind a thick curtain, and do what you must. There are accounts of courtiers simply relieving themselves in fireplaces or along the edges of halls during crowded gatherings. Imagine the noise and smell. The servants do their best to clean up each morning, scrubbing or hauling out chamber pots, but the smell lingers in the carpets and behind tapestries. Queen Marie-Thérèse, Louis XIV's wife, once stepped in a pile of feces left in the corridor by a courtier's pet, or perhaps a careless person, and the king was furious about the lax cleanliness. He ordered, at various times, for the palace passages to be sluiced with water and vinegar. They even tried spreading fresh hay or herbs on the floors to absorb waste and odor, like a giant litter box. But with hundreds of visitors a day, many not wanting to lose their place in a court event by venturing off to the latrine in another wing, accidents or deliberate corners were inevitable. This contributed to Versailles earning a hidden reputation as beautifully filthy. One satirist called it the gilded sewer. In response, courtiers armed themselves. They carried ornate perfumed handkerchiefs and nosegays, bouquets, to hold to their noses when walking through particularly pungent hallways. Women's huge fan outfits? Yes, fans weren't just for flirting signals. A gentle wave in front of the face brought a waft of perfumed air from one's handkerchief or gloves to counteract any unwelcome whiff. Not everyone embraced the anti-water sentiment equally. Some Enlightenment thinkers and early doctors began to suggest that perhaps washing was good for you. By the late 17th century, a few were challenging the water is dangerous notion. For example, Sir John Floyer, an English physician, wrote The History of Cold Bathing in 1702, advocating plunging into cold water for health, and others observed that people who did bathe periodically weren't dying off from it. But at Louis XIV's court, the king himself set the tone. He took very few baths in his lifetime. Some say only 2 full immersion baths. Others say he did bathe more in youth but stopped on physicians' advice. He did, however, take partial washes and was fanatical about being perfumed and powdered fresh daily. In one anecdote, he complained of a persistent odor from one of his courtiers. It turned out the nobleman had bravely attempted to actually bathe, and the king supposedly was not pleased by the unfamiliar wet smell. How accurate that story is can be debated, but it reflects the culture. Let's not forget, though, while the elites had these peculiar habits, common folk during the 16th to 18th centuries still often had to do physical work and would at least wash off now and then. A farmer might bathe in a pond on a hot day, or have a weekly wash in a washtub. And among some segments of society, bathing never fully died. In southern Europe, for instance, bathhouses influenced by Islamic culture persisted longer. In Scandinavia, the sauna tradition continued unabated. Sweating in a hot wooden hut and then rolling in the snow or jumping in a lake was a cherished practice, and foreigners who visited Finland or Sweden remarked on how the locals seemed quite clean and healthy, though they found the sauna custom peculiar. Meanwhile, across the globe during this era, other cultures still valued cleanliness highly. A vivid contrast. In the Aztec Empire of the 16th century, it was recorded that the Emperor Montezuma bathed twice a day in his magnificent cedar wood tub, and ordinary Aztecs frequented steam baths like sweat lodges and bathed in lakes or rivers regularly. They even had soaps made from plant roots, like the amole soap root, and used fragrant flowers like soap to clean and perfume their bodies. The Spaniards who arrived, by comparison, rarely bathed, and to the Aztecs, the newcomers must have smelled terrible. In fact, one chronicler noted the indigenous people's surprise that these heavily armored Europeans did not wash every day and had such unkempt beards and body hair. The Spaniards, for their part, initially found the Aztec habit of daily bathing excessive and, through their own cultural lens, somewhat effeminate or indulgent. But one wonders if, privately, some Spaniards partook in the wonderful bathing pools of Tenochtitlan once they experienced the heat there. In Mughal India, around 1600, the Emperor Akbar enjoyed luxurious baths in perfumed water. Mughal palaces included hammams, modeled after Persian, Turkish baths, where the royals could be steamed, scrubbed, and perfumed to their heart's content. South Asian culture, part Hindu, part Islamic influences, strongly emphasized daily washing, even if not full immersion, at least pouring water over oneself. It was routine to bathe each morning in rivers or with buckets of water. British visitors in the 18th century India sometimes commented with puzzlement on how often the natives bathed, even in the cooler season. Some eventually adopted the habit themselves due to the tropical climate, though often they still clung to their European perfume and powder approach. Back in Europe, by the 18th century, attitudes slowly began shifting. The Age of Enlightenment brought about not just scientific progress, but also new public health concerns. After centuries of plagues and realizing that dirt might correlate with disease, some cities started street cleaning initiatives. People like Benjamin Franklin advocated for fresh air and even personal hygiene. Franklin famously enjoyed air baths, sitting nude in his room each morning for a half hour to let the air cleanse his body, since he didn't like cold water. In the 1760s, England, the idea of sea bathing as a health cure became fashionable. Doctors started sending patients to coastal resorts like Bath or Brighton to immerse in cold ocean water to invigorate and cure ailments. Bathing machines, little cabanas on wheels, were invented so modest folks could go into the sea and bathe without being seen. The fact that these devices were needed shows that direct public bathing was still seen as somewhat indecent. The late 18th century also saw a small revival of personal bathing among those who could afford it. Queen Marie Antoinette of France, for example, adored taking baths. She had a special bathing apartment at Versailles with a deep tub, and she would bathe, in a thin linen gown, in tepid water infused with perfumes or skin-softening additives like sweet almond milk. She didn't do it daily, but often enough that it became part of her image of luxury. She would have music played or have her ladies read to her while she soaked, and after the bath, her servants would present her with trays of powder and pomade to recoif her hair, and towels steeped in fresh hot herb infusions to pat her dry, a mix of bathing and perfuming rituals combined. As we approach the 1800s, the stage is set for a true hygiene revolution. Knowledge from the Enlightenment, combined with the coming Industrial Revolution, will radically transform how humans approach cleanliness. But before we celebrate the modern age, we have one more era of challenge: the early industrial 19th century, where suddenly cities get even more crowded and filthy before they get cleaner. And it's in that crucible that the importance of hygiene will be scientifically proven. So here we are around 1800. Many European aristocrats still carry the mindset of perfumed nobility, while the burgeoning middle class is starting to embrace simpler, cleaner habits. The influence of the Enlightenment, and also a reaction to the excesses of the powdered wigs. By 1800, men have largely dropped wigs and makeup and prefer a more natural look, at least for a while. For common people, bathing is still a chore, but soap is getting cheaper and more plentiful, and we're on the cusp of breakthroughs in plumbing, public health, and understanding of disease that will propel cleanliness from luxury or vanity into a basic expectation for all. The 19th century arrives with the thunder of industrial progress. Coal-fired factories, steam locomotives, and swelling cities mark this era. It's an age of invention and optimism, but also of grimy urban squalor. If you time traveled to Victorian England or Gilded Age America, the first thing to hit you might be the thick soot in the air or the stench of waste in the streets. This is a period where personal hygiene advancements will spring from the urgent need to combat the filth of rapidly growing cities. Let's step into London in 1850. The city is teeming with people, millions living in close quarters, and blanketed in a haze of coal smoke, the infamous London fog, yellow and acrid, which is really coal smog. In the narrow lanes of Whitechapel or Southwark, impoverished families cram into single rooms of rickety tenements. Water has to be fetched from a common pump in the street. And that pump water, well, it might be drawing from a well that's only a few yards from a cesspit. In fact, many urban water sources are contaminated with sewage. Folks don't know that yet. They think if water looks clear, it's fine. So each morning, little Annie, age 8, is sent down with a bucket to get the family's water for the day. She waits in line behind other sooty-faced children at the public pump. She fills the bucket. The water is a bit cloudy, but they'll use it for cooking, a little washing, and, if any to spare, maybe a bit of a sponge bath for the baby. Back home, her mother heats a kettle of this water on their tiny coal stove. It's precious, so she won't waste it on full bathing. Instead, she dampens a rag and gives Annie a cursory scrub. Face, neck, hands at least, because those are visible. Annie squirms as her mother rubs the rough cloth behind her ears. You've got coal dust all over, lovey. Hold still. If it's Saturday, maybe they'll set up the tin bath before the hearth. They share the same water, as in old times. Father goes first, then some hot water added and mother goes, then the children from oldest to youngest, the baby last. In these conditions, 1 tub a week is doing well. Many families can't manage even that. There's rent to pay, coals to buy. Soap costs money too, though it's getting cheaper by mid-century thanks to industrial production. Annie's family uses a rough brown soap for laundry and all-purpose cleaning. It's made from beef tallow and industrial lye, and it smells a bit like, well, a barnyard, but it strips dirt. For personal washing, they might have a small bar of nicer soap scented with carbolic, a new disinfectant smell of the era, or perhaps some lavender, which mother uses sparingly when cleaning up for church on Sunday. Now contrast this with a more affluent scene. The same city, 1850, but in the West End, Mrs. Victoria Thompson wakes in her well-appointed townhouse. She rings a bell, and her maid brings hot water to fill the porcelain wash basin on the dresser. Mrs. Thompson performs her morning ablutions. She washes her face with a soft flannel cloth and scented soap, maybe a fine soap from Yardley's, smelling of English lavender. Scrubbing gently. She rinses and pats dry with a clean towel. She has a stack of fresh linens, something not possible for the poor who may own 2 towels total, if that. She brushes her teeth with a newfangled device, an actual toothbrush with a bone handle and boar bristles, using a bit of tooth powder that tastes of peppermint and chalk. Perhaps she finishes with a swish of weak tea, or even the newly marketed Lister's dentifrice rinse. If she feels a bit sticky in summer, she might take a sponge bath. That is, she stands in her dressing area, and her maid will sponge her torso and limbs with warm water from the basin, then quickly dry and dust her skin with a lavender-scented talc. Full tub baths are still something she might do only occasionally, perhaps once or twice a week, because heating and hauling all that water is a chore. But unlike previous centuries, she doesn't have a fear of bathing. It's more a matter of logistics. In fact, the Thompsons are considering installing a piped-in water system and even a bathroom in their home, a concept that's emerging among the well-to-do. Some mansions already boast fully plumbed bathrooms with huge cast-iron bathtubs, flush toilets, and marble sinks, the height of luxury and modernity. Indeed, the mid-19th century is when indoor plumbing starts to trickle into private homes. Cities are building waterworks. For example, New York's Croton Aqueduct, 1842, brought fresh water into the growing metropolis, and London's myriad private water companies by mid-century are pumping river and spring water to neighborhoods, though not consistently clean or available to all. The improvement in water supply is driven in no small part by repeated cholera epidemics. In 1849 and 1854, cholera ravages London again. A certain Dr. John Snow famously investigates, and in 1854 links a bad outbreak to one contaminated street pump, the Broad Street Pump, essentially proving that cholera spreads through water, not bad air, as once thought. This revelation is a turning point. It triggers a public health revolution that emphasizes clean water and sewage disposal. In 1858, the Great Stink occurs. A horrendous summer heat wave bakes the sewage-laden Thames, producing such an unbearable stench that Parliament can't function. Curtains soaked in chloride of limacide. This galvanizes action. Soon the brilliant engineer Joseph Bazalgette is constructing a modern sewer network for London, completed in the 1860s. With sewers to carry waste away and aqueducts to bring clean water in, the stage is set for profound changes in personal cleanliness. It's in the latter half of the 19th century that words like sanitary and hygiene become common in the public vocabulary. Let's visit the Thompsons a generation later in 1890. They've moved on up and now have a proper bathroom in their house. It contains a gleaming enameled clawfoot tub, a ceramic wash basin with 2 taps, cold and the new luxury, hot running water via a gas-heated boiler in the cellar, and even a water closet, toilet that flushes. Mrs. Thompson, now older, couldn't be happier. No more chamber pots under the bed, no more waiting for maid to lug buckets. She can take a warm bath every evening if she likes, and she does like. Her doctor encourages regular bathing for her rheumatism and sleep. Her husband soaks in the tub on Sundays after church, scrubbing with vigor. He actually enjoys cleaning now, finding it a relaxing ritual rather than a chore or rare indulgence. They've also embraced other modern habits. Every morning and night, they brush their teeth with mass-produced toothbrushes. No more boar bristles. Now there are ones with celluloid handles and eventually nylon bristles in the new century. A company called Colgate is selling nice minty toothpaste in a jar and will soon introduce it in collapsible tubes, which is so handy. They have soft, plentiful soap. By now, soap is factory-made in huge quantities. William Hesketh Lever in England is marketing Sunlight soap by the late 1880s, a soap specially made for laundry, but so pure it can be used for bathing too. And he wraps it in paper with branding, making it a recognizable product. Soap is cheap enough that even working-class families buy it regularly. The Thompsons use a fine milled toilet soap for bathing with scents like violet or almond. A bar of it sits by each sink for hand washing, a practice that is catching on due to public health campaigns. Yes, the late 19th century sees the advent of public health education. Pamphlets, posters, even school lessons start to include advice on cleanliness. Wash your hands before meals and after using the privy. Brush your teeth to keep them sound. A weekly bath is a duty of health. There is a comparative zeal for cleanliness creeping into society. Part of it is social. Being clean is seen as a mark of decency and self-respect, especially for the rising middle class. Part of it is scientific. Germ theory is emerging. Pasteur published in the 1860s, and by the 1880s, Koch and others have identified specific microbes for diseases. Doctors now know diseases are not caused by miasma, but by bacteria, and bacteria can often be removed or killed by soap and hot water. Hospitals start instituting rigorous hygiene. Surgeons wash their hands in carbolic acid. Nurses change linens and bathe patients more often, and sterilization of instruments becomes standard after Joseph Lister's work on antiseptics in the 1860s. Even in the military, hygiene reforms happen. British barracks in the 1880s build bathhouses for soldiers. During the American Civil War, 1861 to 65, lack of hygiene caused rampant disease. So by the late 19th century, armies are emphasizing clean camps, bathing, and delousing to keep troops healthy. Public baths make a comeback for the urban poor. In cities like Liverpool, London, New York, and Chicago, philanthropists and city governments open bathhouses where those living in tenements can, for a small fee or free, get a hot bath in a clean facility. By 1900, New York City has floating river bathhouses and dozens of municipal bath buildings. Posters urge the poor to use the baths, come out clean and healthy. People do use them enthusiastically, especially in summer when the heat and grime become too much. Let's peek into one of these public bathhouses, say in 1900 on New York's Lower East Side. A young immigrant boy, perhaps 10 years old, pays a penny and enters a stark but blessedly warm tile-lined room. The attendant gives him a bar of soap and a towel. The boy finds an open stall, just a partitioned area with a tub or shower. He might have never used a shower, but here it is. He pulls a chain, and cold water cascades from an overhead nozzle. He yelps, and an attendant shows him the hot water tap to mix in. Soon, he's standing under a glorious warm shower, the first of his life, scrubbing months of factory soot and street dirt off his skinny body with strong yellow soap. Afterward, he dries with a clean towel and steps out feeling like a new person. This experience will become routine for many. By the 1910s, bath day at the public baths is part of life for those without plumbing at home. While cities grapple with cleanliness, rural life also changes. By the late 1800s, even in remote villages, affordable soap, mass-produced enamel basins, and printed advice literature, like household guides for farmers' wives, are spreading the gospel of cleanliness. A prairie homesteader's wife in 1890 might now insist on a weekly family bath in a big washtub by the kitchen fire. Saturday night bath is an institution, so everyone is clean for church on Sunday. They heat water in a giant kettle, fill the tub, and each family member takes a turn. It's a lot of work, but gradually fewer people skip it. Also, clothing is more washable now. Underwear and shirts are made of cotton instead of linen or wool, and cotton is easier to scrub and boil. With the invention of the hand crank washing machine in the mid-19th century, and eventually early electric washers by the 1900s, doing laundry, while still a chore, becomes less physically punishing than pounding on rocks. Clean clothes are more accessible, so people can change more often and not wear the same stained outfit all week. By the early 20th century, personal hygiene is hitting its modern stride. It's remarkable how fast things changed between, say, 1850 and 1950. In 1850, most people didn't bathe more than once a week, if that. Few brushed their teeth regularly, and none used deodorant. By 1950, daily showers, morning and night toothbrushing, and daily deodorant use were standard in many countries, especially the US. Let's track some of these specifics. Tooth care. In 1900, a fair number of people still lost many teeth by age 50 due to decay. But the habit of toothbrushing, imported from Europe where it had caught on among gentlemen in the late 18th century, became truly mainstream in the early 20th. Schools and the military played a big role. Soldiers in World War I, 1914 to 18, were issued toothbrushes and shown how to use them. Many returning soldiers brought that habit home. By World War II, 1939 to 45, U.S. military had a slogan, "A toothbrush in every kit," and dental exams were mandatory. The armed forces basically bullied a generation into good oral hygiene. The invention of nylon bristles in 1938 by DuPont made toothbrushes cheaper and more effective. Boar bristles often harbored bacteria and fell out. In the 1940s to 50s, public health campaigns extolled the virtues of fluoride toothpastes, first introduced around 1914, but widely marketed after World War II, when fluoride's anti-cavity effect was confirmed. Thus, by mid-century, the average person's smile was far healthier than their great-great-grandparents'. Bathing, showering. The trend moved from weekly baths to daily bathing over the late 19th to mid-20th century. The advent of the hot water heater. Thank you, 1880s inventors and early 20th century refinements, meant you didn't have to boil water on the stove. By 1930, many urban apartments had hot running water and a tub. Showers were a later addition. Many early 20th century people still used baths only, but shower attachments and stalls became popular mid-century as space savers and time savers. By the 1950s to 60s, in places like the US, it's not unusual for people to shower every morning. A concept that would astonish someone from 1850 who might consider a full-body wash once or twice a week plenty. Deodorant. The first underarm deodorant, Mum, appeared in the late 1880s as a cream. Then in 1903, the first antiperspirant, Everdree, came out using aluminum salts to actually block sweat. But these were slow to be adopted. Many early 20th century folks still just masked odor with perfume. The big change came with aggressive advertising. In the 1910s to 20s, ads, often playing on women's insecurities, essentially shamed people into using deodorant. One famous Odorono ad from 1919 told of a young lady losing out on a marriage proposal because of underarm odor. Scandalous. Sales of deodorants boomed. By the 1930s, millions were using them. After World War II, aerosol spray deodorants came, and by the 1960s, both men and women considered deodorant part of their daily routine. The notion that one might naturally have some body odor became socially unacceptable in many settings. Laundry and clothing. The invention of synthetic detergents in the 1930s and their big boom post-World War II made washing clothes even easier and more effective than old soap flakes. Washing machines became common in homes by the 1950s, earlier in wealthy homes, later in others. People could have truly cleaned soft clothes more often. And with the rise of consumerism, clothes became cheaper relative to income. Owning multiple changes of clothes, even multiple pairs of undergarments, became the norm. No longer did anyone outside of dire poverty need to wear the same underwear for a month or keep wearing a shirt that stank. Public facilities. By mid-20th century, at least in developed countries, most houses had indoor plumbing. The outhouse was largely a thing of the past in towns, though in rural areas, outhouses persisted into the 1950s or even 60s in some places. But governments took on projects to provide clean water universally, one of the biggest unsung health victories. The average person could turn a tap and get clean water to wash with and to drink, which meant the difference between life and death historically. Also, cities managed garbage collection better and curbed the dumping of filth in streets. The swill and horse manure that characterized 19th century streets gave way to garbage trucks and street sweepers. The public expectations of cleanliness rose. A city that stank was considered a backward, poor city, and officials took pride in modern sewer systems and treatment plants by mid-century. Scientific awareness. The discovery of penicillin, 1928, and other medical advances sometimes overshadowed the impact of simple hygiene. But by mid-century, it was crystal clear. Washing hands prevents disease. Nurses and doctors washed obsessively and wore gloves. Mothers were told to bathe infants regularly, keep bottles sterilized, etc. Life expectancy soared partly because of cleaner living conditions reducing infectious disease spread. Interestingly, by the late 20th century, some scientists began to say we might have gone too far, that children not exposed to any germs can develop weaker immune systems, the hygiene hypothesis. This has led some parents in recent decades to allow a bit more dirt. Imagine, after centuries of fighting dirt, we consider reintroducing it in microdoses for health. But as we stand now in the 21st century, in a modern home, we enjoy the fruits of this long battle for cleanliness. Think of the simple comfort of a hot shower on demand with pleasantly scented soap that doesn't strip our skin too harshly. Or climbing into bed between freshly laundered sheets, knowing we won't get a whiff of anything foul, only maybe the subtle scent of that lavender fabric softener. We can scarcely imagine the everyday smells that once were commonplace. The sour reek of unwashed bodies in winter layers, or the stench of chamber pots lurking under the bed. It's late at night now. Perhaps you, dear listener, are enjoying that clean coziness. Maybe you've bathed, brushed your teeth with a minty toothpaste, slipped on soft pajamas. The air in your room might have a gentle fragrance from a candle, or just the absence of smoke and sewage that would have filled the night air in a medieval town. We've traveled so far tonight, across thousands of years, peeking into bathrooms, rivers, and bathhouses across the world. It's remarkable how our ancestors' quest for cleanliness has shaped so much of daily life. From the meticulous Egyptians who wouldn't speak a sacred prayer unless freshly washed and perfumed, to the Romans who built grand baths as a daily social ritual, to the medieval folk who tried their best with what they had and luxuriated in the occasional communal tub, to the perfumed courtiers masking layers of grime with jasmine, to the determined engineers and reformers of the 19th century who cleared the water and air for the sake of health. All of them were part of the same human story, trying to balance comfort, health, and dignity. We owe a lot to those past experiences. They taught us what works and what doesn't. We learned that yes, soap and water can save lives, that a clean environment is the foundation for a thriving community, and that while fashions and theories about hygiene may change, the basic desire not to be offensively dirty is pretty universal. Think of a daily act as simple as washing your hands. In that mundane moment, you are participating in a tradition as old as civilization. The Sumerians were washing their hands 4,000 years ago, and as new as the latest public health campaign. We've added our modern twists, fruity hand soaps, automatic faucets, but fundamentally, it's the same act our ancestors did over a clay basin or at a riverside. As you lay here now, maybe the slightest scent of your shampoo lingers in your hair, or your skin feels smooth from a favorite lotion. These small comforts are the culmination of millennia of small innovations and habits passed down. You're cleaner, healthier, and more comfortable than most humans in history could ever hope to be. It's quite something to appreciate. Our long journey through the history of personal hygiene is drawing to a close. It's been quite an adventure, at times amusing, at times eyebrow-raising, or nose-wrinkling, but certainly illuminating. We've seen that being clean meant different things at different times, sometimes ritual purity, sometimes social etiquette, sometimes a rare luxury, sometimes a daily routine. But at heart, people of the past were not so different. Nobody really liked being filthy if they could help it. And when we scrub up in our modern bathrooms, we're not just doing a chore. We're echoing a basic human practice that connects us with all those distant generations. Now it's time to drift off to sleep, comfortably cocooned in your clean sheets. Let your mind wander pleasantly. Perhaps envision yourself in a serene Roman bath, warm water rippling around you, or in a tranquil Japanese onsen under the stars, or simply recall the comforting feel of a shower you took when you were tired and how it revived you. There's a lovely calm in being clean and relaxed. Thank you for accompanying me on this not so glamorous but deeply fascinating journey back through time. I hope it leaves you with a greater appreciation for the simple luxury of cleanliness that we have today, and maybe a few quirky historical tidbits to ponder. The next time you enjoy a hot bath or brush your teeth, you might smile thinking of King Louis XIV avoiding his tub, or a Viking combing his hair by firelight. For now, though, close your eyes. You're here, in the present, warm, clean, and safe. The long day is done, the historical dust has settled, and you can breathe easy, as they might say in another age, Good night, sleep tight, and may your dreams be sweet and refreshing. Sleep well, and until our next adventure, I bid you a fond farewell. In the language of old parting blessings, may you awake in good health and humor. Thank you for listening, everyone. Take care. Good night and pleasant dreams.